want you to promise me that when I put this picture of a baby on the board, you won't laugh, right? Because it's not kind to laugh at something just because it looks like that. Right? And by the way, ladies, these pictures aren't to scale, okay? Just leave that thought with you. So they looked at their little baby and they thought, what can we call our child? And hey, by the way, this isn't a story that I've made up. This is a Jesus story. This is about something that actually happened a long time ago, a long way away, and it happened to Jesus. And the Bible doesn't tell me this bit. I mean, the Bible is wonderful. It's God's special book, but it doesn't tell me every detail, everything I want to know. So I've had to imagine how the story began. I'll tell you when we get to the Bible bit. But right now, this is just me thinking out loud. So you've got some proud parents, and they're looking at their little boy, and they're wondering, what can we call him? And hey, names were a big deal a long time ago in the land of Israel. Families would fall out and not talk to each other for years if a baby was given the wrong name. So they thought very carefully about what they would call a baby. And they decided, well, what sort of boy do we want him to be? What sort of man do we want him to grow up to be like? And they said, we want him to be a good man. We want him to be pure and good. And so they gave him a name. It's in another language. They gave him a name which means pure and good. Now, I'm not going to tell you his name right now, but the name means pure and good. Do we understand that? Okay. So they looked at their baby and they gave him a name, and the name they gave him meant pure and good. Well, I'm just imagining this bit. It still isn't the Bible bit. I'll tell you when we get there, okay? I'm just imagining, as he got a little bit older, he began to show signs of not being very good. He started doing things which were not good. Like, for example, and I'm just imagining this, I can imagine one day, he went into his mum's kitchen when mum wasn't there, and he knew there was some jam in a pot or something really sweet and lovely and yummy. And so he went into the kitchen, no one around. And I can imagine he went to the shelf and he took hold of a pot of jam and he started digging his fingers in and shoveling it into his face as fast as he could. And then he heard the sound of Mum coming back. Mum was obviously a big girl, so she's coming back in. And what am I going to do with the jam? To put this down a minute. What am I going to do? So he put it behind his back like that. And Mum came in and said, pure and good. Of course, that wasn't his name. It's just what his name means. Pure and good. Yes, Mum. What have you got behind your back? My hands. Don't be cheeky. Show me. All right. And the other one. Both of them together, and out would come, do you see? And maybe something else he did, I don't know, but I suspect when he went to school, he probably found it easier to look over other people's work and copy what they were doing to cheat than to work it out himself, except if it was arithmetic, mathematics. I'm pretty sure that even as a child, anything to do with numbers, he was pretty good at. But you see, before he was very old, little pure and good stopped being pure and good and started lying and started cheating and showing signs of becoming bad. And in fact, he was so... Is there a funny way to put it? He was so good at being bad. You see, that's kind of clumsy, isn't it? Because you can't really be good if you're being bad. He was so clever at being bad that the Bible says, oh yeah, we're on the Bible now. The Bible says that this man was so clever at being bad, at cheating, that he got a job and he was in charge of lots and lots of other cheats, taking tax money from people, much, much more than he should have. And that's what he was. He was the chief, the boss, in charge of all the crooked tax collectors in his area. And one day this man was sitting, probably working outside, with a couple of minders to look after him, a couple of bouncers, working outside when he heard the sound of a crowd coming along the road. And he couldn't see very much, but he could hear what the people were saying. The people were shouting and they were calling out somebody's name. And the name they were calling out was Jesus. And this man realised that somewhere in the middle of this crowd there was Jesus. And he could hear people saying, "Good old Jesus! 3 cheers for Jesus!" People were holding up their babies and saying, "Bless my baby Jesus." People who were sick were pushing through to the front of the crowd and saying, "Make me better, Jesus." And this man thought to himself, wow, Jesus is in the crowd. And he wanted to see Jesus. He probably didn't want Jesus to see him, but he wanted to have a look at Jesus. There was a problem. The Bible says that he couldn't see over the heads of the people in the crowd because he was short. So, this is what he did. Growing nearby, there was a tree. It was the sort of tree which, when I was a boy and used to climb trees back in London, where I was born and raised, it was the sort of tree that when I was a boy I would have said was a good climbing tree, because the branches came out from quite low to the ground. So this man, although he was probably middle-aged, he climbed up the tree so he could look down from the branches and see Jesus in the middle of the crowd. And I bet when the people saw him up the tree, they thought that was very funny indeed. I expect the kids all got round the bottom of the tree and looked up and said, "Oh, look, I can see his knickers." Oh. Because the children in the town knew that if there was one man that they could be cheeky to and their dads wouldn't mind, it was this man, because this man was the most hated man in the town. Oh, by the way, are some of you wondering why he bothered to climb up a tree? Why didn't he just push his way through the crowd? Look, he was bad, he wasn't stupid. He knew the people in this crowd hated him. He knew that in the crowd there would be carpenters with sharp chisels in their belt. There'd be fishermen with skinning and filleting knives in their belts. He wasn't going to push into the middle of a crowd that hated him, because if he got into the middle of a crowd, he probably wouldn't get out of the middle of the crowd. Someone would be in the crowd, they'd feel themselves being pushed from behind and say, "Oh, who are you pushing? Oh, look, see who it is? It's the tax collector. He took a lot of money off me, I'll have him." And the crowd would have moved on and he wouldn't have. That's why he went up the tree. And Jesus looked up into the tree and he said, "Zacchaeus," because that was his name. And that's what Zacchaeus means, pure and good. He looked at Zacchaeus and he said, "You and I need to have a talk, boy. Come on, let's go to your place." If ever, when you were children, you learnt songs about Zacchaeus going to have tea with Jesus, no, not really. This was very serious stuff. Come on, boy. God didn't make you to be this sort of man. This isn't the sort of man your parents wanted you to be. It's not the sort of man God wanted you to be. Come on, let's go to your place and really get down to it, shall we? Let's have a bit of a chat about the way you're living your life. So Zacchaeus came down the tree and he took Jesus off to his house. The people watching, they were horrified, they were appalled, they were disgusted with Jesus for going into the house of a man as bad as Zacchaeus. Jesus didn't care what people thought of him. That's a very strange thing, you know. Jesus really didn't care about his reputation. He hung around with people and bad people, and if good people didn't like it, good people could lump it. Jesus had come for sinful people, for bad people. And Zacchaeus, after having a chat with Jesus, and we don't know what they said, but after having a talk with Jesus, Zacchaeus came outside to where the crowd was all outside his house. He came outside, having mysteriously lost the left leg somewhere in the process. He came outside and he said this to the crowd and to Jesus. He said, "If I've taken anything from anyone, that I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. I'm going to give it back. In fact, he said, I'm going to give people back 4 times as much as I took. And when Jesus heard Zacchaeus say that, he said, wow, this man really is saved. This man really is put right with God. You know why? Because God had changed him. Friendship with Jesus had changed Zacchaeus on the inside, and that made a difference to how he was going to live on the outside. And that's what getting to know Jesus really does. It begins to change us on the inside. All the rotten, shabby, shameful, hurtful, crude, rude, unkind, untrue things we've said and done and even thought. Jesus can forgive us, and he can change us to be more like him, just like he did with Zacchaeus. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing that he can't do. And what he loves to do is get inside our hearts and make us into brand new people. And that's the old story with the old pictures for Lol this morning. Thank you, Catherine.